think we're going to start getting started here. Okay. Wow, thank you everyone so much for coming out. My name is Caroline Deemer. I am the programming coordinator here at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum, and I am so thank you. And I am so excited to welcome you all to this month's Think and Drink. Think and Drinks, for those who don't know, are a free monthly speaker series that happens on the first Thursday of every month. And we always have themes for our yearly talks. So this year's theme is Great Women of the Great Lakes and Beyond. So while I don't believe there are any female pirates from the Great Lakes, we've definitely got some maybe awesome pirates, awesome female pirates from beyond. So it's going to be very exciting. So before I let Dr. Michelle Kuhl go, just make sure to silence your phones, and we'll get into this wonderful presentation. So Michelle, take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I live in Oshkosh and teach at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. And I've never been to Manitowoc, so I really enjoyed coming here. And I love the enthusiasm. We've got people dressed up. I'm wondering if I should encourage my students to have some grog before they come to class. And maybe that would, make them a little more lively. No, my research and publications are in late 19th and early 20th century social activism and movements. But once I went through the grueling process of getting tenure, which is like a 7-year job interview, I decided to try something fun, like keep doing my bread and butter courses and things like that. But I actually polled multiple classes and asked them, if I developed a freshman seminar, what topic would you be most interested in? And I asked them history of witches, history of communes, history of courtship, or history of pirates. And pirates killed it. So I developed a freshman course on the history of pirates, and I've been teaching it for about 8 years, and it's a lot of fun for me. I really like the students. Sometimes they're a little disappointed when they find out we're not just going to be kicking back and chilling out every day. They're going to have to learn about, the British Navy and things like that. So, but ultimately they come around and find it's a good way to learn history. I think of it a little bit like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? So, so tonight I have a few themes I want to hit. This might be overly ambitious, but I will try to talk about a bit about the long history of piracy, and particularly the rise of the Golden Age of Piracy in the Caribbean. I'll touch on the 2 famous female pirates who were part of this Golden Age of Piracy in the Caribbean. I want to take a look also at the enduring popularity of pirates. Like, why do they loom so large in the imagination? And then finally, a little bit of a dash through the 20th century and trends about piracy in the imagination in literacy and movies in the 20th century. All right, just to start with some definitions, or at least one definition, a pirate is someone who steals at sea. So that makes them different than a robber or things like that. And pirates are everywhere in the world throughout history. Anywhere you have a coastline, pirates pop up. So in the history of the Mediterranean, for example, there's all sorts of pirates that run around the Mediterranean. And historians have noticed a trend that where you have a weak state, pirates fill the vacuum. So there's a lot of rise and fall of pirates in the Mediterranean. This is a statue of King Minos of Crete in the ancient world. Apparently, he was one of the stronger kings of Crete. And while he was reigning, he had warships and whatnot to patrol the waters and patrol his shipping lanes and help the pirates, stamp out some of the pirates. But once he died, things kind of fell apart, and the pirates rose up again. So that is one of the themes of the class I teach, is that pirates will rise to fill a vacuum if there's a weak state. We can see this today around the world. For example, Somalia has a large coastline and a large population, but the government does not patrol the waters, and it doesn't have, the strength in the Navy to do that. So pirates pop up wherever you have a coastline and a lack of a strong government or Navy. We can see also as pirates rise and fall in the Mediterranean, they were running around all over the place. And then Alexander the Great came to power. And one of his goals was to control the shipping lanes and the waters on the coastlines of his empire. And at one point, he captured a pirate. And you can see here, you probably can't see, so I'll read it to you. Alexander the Great asked this pirate, "What gives you the right to sail the seas, taking by force things that do not belong to you?" So basically, this is Alexander the Great, an empire, chastising this pirate, saying, like, who are you to rob me, right? And the pirate sasses back. This man named Diomedes, the pirate, said, "Oh, emperor, what could possibly give you the right to travel the whole world, taking by force things that do not belong to you? Who gave you the right to occupy the land of Egypt? Who made you king of Persia? By what authority did you invade the land of India? Because I use my own boat, I'm called a pirate. You use your army and your navy, and so you are proclaimed an emperor. If you ask me who is the greater criminal, I cannot say." So this is an enduring theme of pirates. Organically, pirates come up with this ethical logic of saying, just because you're a king or an emperor and you took things by force with your army or navy, so you're on the right side of the law and you make laws. But I'm doing the exact same thing, taking things by force that don't belong to me. I'm just a smaller operator, but I'm doing the same thing. So we see this, we can call it the Robin Hood ethic, right? Of people who are stealing from the rich and feeling like they're giving it to the poor, even if the poor are just themselves or their crew. So we see this pop up over and over again throughout the world as pirates do their bidding. Famously, the Roman Empire, as it grew, had a lot of problems with pirates disrupting shipping of the grain trade from Egypt, which is the way that they fed their people in Rome. And there's a lot of history on Pompey, who was given a lot of power to fight the pirates in the Mediterranean. And he gathered a whole organized squadrons of naval ships to stamp out the pirates. And they held great speeches for him and proclaimed him, a great military leader, to the point where they would flood the Colosseum in Rome and reenact some of these sea battles with the pirates. Kind of a dirty secret with Pompey is he did fight them and he was organized and brave, but he also bribed a lot of them. Which is, yep. So that there's basically two ways of dealing with pirates, just in case you ever encounter some and need to think through your options. One is military force. To fight them off in naval battles. But the other is bribing them. Pirates are lazy. If they could avoid a fight, they can. So if they could get some money without actually fighting it out, they often will take bribes. So this is one of the ways that the Roman Empire dealt with pirates, fighting them and bribing them. All right, so that's just kind of a very brief jaunt through the ancient world. Famously, we have the rise of Barbary pirates after there's a long history of crusades in the medieval period, leading to a lot of bad feelings between Muslims in the Middle East and Christians in Europe. And then we have the rise of the Ottoman Empire. And again, they have this ethic where they think they are protecting their lands from interference from outside. And the Ottoman Empire funds pirate states in the Barbary coast. And they make a lot of their money from piracy, from attacking European Christian shipping. Does anyone here know the Marine song? Can you finish it? From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of... Hey, you got it, right? So that's the birth of the Marines, is fighting pirates in the Barbary states of North Africa, right? This is why we had that. They were... the Mediterranean was the largest marketplace in the world. So American shipping was traveling there after we became our own country and defeated England in the American Revolution. But England had either fought pirates or bribed them, the Barbary Coast pirates. And once American ships went in there with our own flag, no longer flying the English flag, the pirates were attacking American shipping. And we didn't have much of a military force or much of a treasury to either fight them or bribe them. And so this actually helped build up the American military, is that to be able to deal with pirates in the Mediterranean so we could run our trade and shipping there. On the right are two of the most famous Barbary pirates, the Barbarossa brothers, who one of them was they were used to be three brothers, and they were all captured during some raids in the Crusades by the Knights of St. John. One of them died fighting. The other two were enslaved for years, rowing oars on a galley slave. And when their dad ransomed them out, they vowed to strike back against English Christians in the history of the Crusades, and they helped fund the Barbary states. And so they're considered great villains by Europe, but they're considered great heroes by the Ottoman Empire. And in Turkey, there's a statue to them, praising them for helping to defend their lands. So again, pirates really bring up this question of criminality and ethics, right? Who's on the right side in these kind of clashes? Okay, so now I'm going to shift to the rise of the Golden Age of Piracy. And on the throne of Spain in the 18th century was Charles II. That's him on the left. And this is like paintings at that time from royal court painters were like filters today in photography, right? It wasn't an accurate representation. So this is like the most flattering portrait they could make of him. And on the right is his family tree, which it looks more like a circle than a tree. Yes, those Habsburgs, this royal family in Europe was pretty inbred, right? They kept marrying other royal people because they believed their blood was better. And they also had more property and lands and political clout. So they like to marry within each other. But their DNA by today's standards is pretty messed up. Modern scientists have looked at his parents' DNA and the family tree and concluded his parents were genetically closer than siblings. Yeah, right. So, yeah. Yeah. So Charles II had a lot of problems. So he inherits, the divine right of monarchy by being born the son of a king and becomes king. But he can barely walk. He can barely talk. He seems to not understand much of what's going on. He kind of seems to understand from what his advisors tell him that he's important because his ancestors were important, but they were dead. And so he demanded to see them. And ultimately, because he was king, they went and dug them up so he could look at them. And that was one of his favorite pastimes. They would bury them as soon as possible. And then a few days later, he'd want to see them again. So they tried really hard to coach him into how to have sex so he could produce an heir, but it never worked. So he was not a functioning person. And so, once he dies, there's no heir to the kingdom of Spain, which at this point is one of the richest and most powerful kingdoms in Europe because they got so much money from running around the New World and getting gold and silver and bringing it back on treasure ships, right? So he dies, and this kicks off this war called the War of Spanish Succession because, again, they're trying to find out who's going to be king now that the king is dead and there's no heir. And a lot of different countries in Europe, because they're all related, their royalties are related, a lot of different kingdoms think they have a claim that one of their royal people should be king of Spain. So there's a huge war. England fights on one side, and France and Spain, and Prussia gets involved, and it's just a huge mess. So for our purposes, what we care about is that the British, this is not yet the point where the British have the greatest navy in the world. Pirates actually helped the British develop their navy, or the British developed their navy because of pirates, in the same way that the Roman Empire did. So what the British do is there's a lot of merchant ships. There's captains who companies who privately own ships, and the British make them a deal. If you use your ship to attack the French or the Spanish, you can take their stuff. We'll give you this, basically a permission slip. The fancy term is a letter of marque. So basically now you're a pirate with a permission slip. So you're on the right side of the law in English eyes. If you attack the French or Spanish and you take their stuff, bring it by London, give the monarch a cut, and you can keep the rest, right? So this is what a privateer is. It's basically a pirate with a permission slip. So there's thousands of sailors and ship captains who do this during the War of Spanish Succession. So when this inbred king of Spain dies without an heir, this war kicks off, and then you have all these ships running around the Atlantic and part of the Pacific, and many of them really like it. They're good at it. They're brave, right? They can sail up to another ship and, cannon fire to get it to stop and row across and board it with, ladders, which is the same technology pirates use today off the coast of Somalia. Like, get a little boat, get close to a big boat, throw up a hook and ladder rope, climb up the side, fight it out, and then maybe you get some stuff. So the technology and the process is still the same. So it's cheaper than building up a whole navy, right, for the British. It really undermines the economic strength of their enemies while they're at war. And however, so this works for, as you can see, over 10 years. But then once the war is over and they make a peace treaty, England basically says, okay, privateers, we're revoking your letters of marque. You no longer have a permission slip to attack the French and the Spanish and take their stuff. Don't do that anymore. That's now a crime. So this thing that you did for over 10 years is now illegal, right? And so they also, what there is of the English Navy, like cuts it more than half. So there's tons of sailors out of work. There's a ton of poor people who are sailors, and they have one skill. They know how to sail. They know how to ride up to a bigger boat and take their stuff. So this is what kicks off what we call the Golden Age of Piracy. So all these former privateers keep doing the same thing, only now they're pirates, not privateers. And some of them keep some sense of nationalism, that they only attack French or Spanish ships, and some of them just go full on. They think of themselves as having no nation anymore. They are no longer British. They are, there's a really good book I have up here. I have some of my favorite books up here. They're now called Villains of All Nations. This is the way the country sees them, that they're everyone's enemies now. So this is what launches the Golden Age of Piracy. So the pirates really like sailing around the Atlantic and sailing around the Caribbean. The Caribbean is pretty chaotic. And as I've said before, anywhere you have a weak state, pirates flourish. There's parts of the Caribbean that the British patrol a bit more, like Jamaica, which is a very profitable sugar colony. But they don't patrol the Bahamas that much because it's not making as much money. The Spanish have their treasure fleets going from Central and South America, laden with gold and silver and other things, going right by these shipping lanes of the Caribbean. And pirates discover that the Bahamas is a weak state. There's a lot of coasts and coves and places to hide where there's not a lot of population and stuff. And from there, they can refit their ships, get fresh water, flip the ships over and get all the barnacles and shipworms off the bottom. This is at a time where these are wooden ships that would really, get damaged. Yeah, they would rot or get damaged. Or there's shipworms that bore into wood and make holes in it and stuff. So they could clean up their ships or swap it out for new ships. And they found that the few merchants that were in the Bahamas didn't ask a lot of questions. So they could bring treasure there and buy food, and drink and stuff. And, they could basically fence their stolen goods there, and no one was hassling them about it. That's actually an important part of the equation when you think about pirates. You don't just have to be brave and be able to take treasure at sea. You got to find a place to land so you can get more food and more water, deal with your ship, and sell your stolen goods and get stuff for it. So having little criminal pockets of places. New Providence, Rhode Island was another place where there was a lot of merchants who weren't asking a lot of questions or looking too closely at where this stuff came from. The Bahamas also had, for a while, a governor named Nicholas Trott, who a pirate ship could roll up. Obviously, a pirate ship, guys dressed in stuff from all over the world, having gold and silver from Spanish ships or from Indian ships from the Indian Ocean, cannonball holes in their ship. And they would just say, "Oh, we're a merchant." He'd be like, "Okay, sure." And they would basically bribe him. So the pirates really start congregating around the Bahamas, and the government is either variously corrupt, willing to take bribes, or once this guy dies, Nicholas Trott, and he's replaced by someone else, they're too afraid of the pirates. They're outnumbered often when the pirates roll in. This is a modern day a picture of the fort in Nassau, and you can see it's not that big, right? So even at its best, and it's not that well maintained. All right, so then we have this roughly 10-year period. Other historians might periodize it differently, but the ones I admire the most of some of these books up here really put it at the end of the War of Spanish Succession. There's also another instance where a hurricane, and we all know hurricanes come out of the Caribbean pretty regularly, right, hits a Spanish treasure ship, and it sinks off the coast of Florida in 1714. And it's close enough to the shore that divers at the time with diving bells and really primitive kind of diving, skills could dive down and scoop up the gold. And this attracts all these out-of-work sailors and former privateers from across the Caribbean and the Atlantic world. And they're all competing to scoop up this treasure from the floor, like diving down and getting it. And they meet, and many of them become friends, and they form different pirate crews. So those are really like the two main causes of this golden age of piracy. The War of Spanish Succession, turning all of these privateers out of work who turned pirate, and then this hurricane sinking this treasure ship so close to the shore that they could get the gold. All right, so these two things launched this. And so this is where we have some of the most famous pirates of the Caribbean. What? Yeah, that's okay. People like Sam Bellamy, who was a poor British guy, who came from the countryside, fought in the War of Spanish Succession, was out of work at the end of it, worked for a while in Massachusetts, and fell in love with a pretty barmaid. But her family didn't want her to marry a poor sailor. So they basically told him to get lost. So he vowed to make a fortune. He goes to the Caribbean, becomes a pirate, actually becomes quite successful, and sails back to Massachusetts to get his barmaid back. But his ship crashes right off the coast. So this is a really sad tale in Massachusetts, this sort of romantic pirate. And so in different pirate stories, I often think I can see like who they're basing pirates off of. So Sam Bellamy is sort of the lover, right? He's the romantic hero who did it all to win his girl, right? We also have on the left an image from the 18th century of probably the most famous pirate. Who do you think that is? Blackbeard, right. So famously, he had wild curly hair, and he really maximized the frightening nature of his appearance. Remember I said pirates were kind of lazy? That's really true of Blackbeard. He actually never killed anyone in a fight until the very last fight he had, where he fought and was ultimately killed. And he took a few guys down with him. But you can see he put lit fuses in his beard. He put musket balls all over himself. He was bristling with muskets and swords and knives. And his hope was that once he boarded a ship, people would be so terrified of his appearance and think he was the very devil, smoking and flaming and everything, that they would just surrender. And it often worked. Like he very, very seldom had to fight. It's not a bad way to go about the world if you make that a goal of yours, just to frighten people into getting your way instead of fighting it out with them, right? So he's part of this golden age of piracy. He knows a lot of these other guys in the Caribbean. He sailed with them, and he ultimately makes his way up to being captain of his own ship. All right, so this brings us to our two famous female pirates in this golden age of piracy. So one is Anne Bonny, and I have this in brackets possibly in front of all of my facts because this is our best guess as to what happened. This is written in a book called The General History of Pirates that was published in the 18th century. But their methods of evidence and fact checking wasn't as rigorous as we have today. So take all of this with a grain of salt. We definitely know that these two women existed because, spoiler alert, they were captured and brought to trial. So we do have those criminal records to know that they were real people. And a lot of people talked about them at the time, and they are written up in this book. So what we think we know about Anne Bonny, and this is a drawing of her from that 18th century book, The General History of Pirates, is she was possibly born in Ireland. And her father was a wealthy man who had a mistress on the side, and she had a baby girl. And most people in town knew that this woman had an illegitimate baby girl. And so the father got her to sort of hide the child for a while. And then he raised her as a son, so that he just brought this son into his family, considering it part of the family, and no one connected the dots that this was actually the female daughter of his mistress. So she's actually raised as a boy. And her father takes her to the Carolinas at one point, and she's clearly a feisty girl with that bad temper. And at one point, this book says that when a young fellow would have lain with her against her will, that's how they talked about sexual assault in those days, she beat him so that he lay ill of it for a considerable time. She was not having it, right? So she is no shrinking violet. So at one point, she marries a guy named James Bonney, who's a poor sailor. Her rich father is pretty mad about this. So it sounds like they take off to the Caribbean. And she decides to take up with another guy. And this is kind of interesting because this is part of what we think is the appeal of piracy for many people, is that they are people who have rejected the rules of the society they're born into. Like, there are very strict rules about sexuality, courtship, and marriage in this time, but she marries, self-marries, self-divorces. Like, she doesn't go through the law. She just leaves her first husband, takes up with another guy. And that's like, she's just making her own rules now that she's a pirate. And she joins this man named Calico Jack Rackham. Isn't that a great name for a pirate? That was his nickname because he wore a lot of flamboyant calicos from voyages to India, where they traded for, unusual fabrics and things like that. So he was kind of a ladies' man. Like, he's a pirate who dresses very flamboyantly. He's very charming. And she falls in with Calico Jack, leaves her first husband, and takes up with him. And then she falls in love with what she thinks is another man, but turns out to be a woman named Mary Read. So Mary Read, and this is an image of her from this 18th century book. She's born in England, and her her mom has a son by a man who goes to sea, right? So she has this son. Her husband's at sea for a few years, and then, oops, she has a daughter while he's gone. So, whoops, she's clearly not, her husband's child, but she conceals this from his family, who lives a little ways off. And then the son dies. So the mom dresses Mary as a boy and tells the family, I still need money for my son. So this husband's family keeps sending her money, thinking that this is her legitimate son. So she's really committed to raising her as a boy so she can keep getting money for him. So she does this for so long that Mary Read really embraces living as a boy. She goes to sea at 13. She fought as a man in the British infantry and cavalry units in Flanders. So she's going to Europe. She's fighting. I guess people just didn't pay close attention in those days. She's able to do this. And then ultimately she's on a ship that sails to the Caribbean, and it's captured by pirates. And what happens often if a ship is captured by pirates is that many of the sailors are thrilled. Does anyone have any clue why? Why would sailors on an English ship be thrilled that their ship is taken by pirates? You want to join them? Yeah. Being a sailor sounded like the most horrible life ever. It's brutally hard work, very little pay. The captains were often like vicious with their punishments and their authority at sea. There's a lot of the captains had ultimate authority at sea to maintain order and discipline. And they did so with whippings, with beatings, with brutal punishments. There's something awful called keel hauling. Oh, wow. Has anyone heard of keel hauling? Yes. Yeah. Can you say what that is?
Something where they hang them off the keel and they dip them in the water and they have to.
Like you go from the front of the boat to the back.
That's right.
Out the back without being bashed by the keel to death, but otherwise you're dead.
All right, the audience is all over this, right? You tie them by the arms and you drop them off the front, drag them underneath the boat. Yeah, they might get knocked. There's barnacles, right? There's mussels, so you're getting ripped up in the salt water, and you also might drown. So, I mean, that's just one of many kind of sadistic and vicious punishments that captain used to maintain order. Yes.
Point in sailing ships was not to drag them all the way to the back because they could follow the rudder and then you'd be in trouble. It's just simply if you throw somebody under the ship at the front end and it's going forward, you're gonna get dragged to the back. Sometimes they would just let go on the possibility it was gonna follow the rudder.
Absolutely.
And then they moved to putting the person in a steel cage, which they threw off the front.
Oh, right. Some of the audiences bring up a steel cage to throw off the front. Right. It's one of the reasons that the U.S. Constitution has an injunction against cruel and unusual punishments, because the British military and the British Navy had so many cruel and unusual punishments for their own citizens. Sailors are often paid very badly. Some of them were not even sailors by choice. right? Some men were sailors in England because they were poor in the countryside and moved to the city. London was an awful place with a lot of disease, polluted river, a lot of poverty, a lot of plagues going through. And the poor were so malnourished in England in the 18th century that when England gathered up people for a war, and the English are great record keepers, I'll give them that, right? They recorded, their height and their weight and such things. And on average, the poor of England drafted into the military were 6 inches shorter than the landowning class. So you can, 6 inches shorter on average. So you can imagine how fewer resources, how much malnutrition, right? How they were stunted in their growth from not having enough access. Oh, I heard someone say scurvy, right? Scurvy is a problem for sailors too, right? It affects, if you don't have enough, we know today that if you don't have regular vitamin C, you can get scurvy and your connective tissue start to loosen. Right. So your gums will release your teeth. If you've ever broken a bone and it healed, it will start to re-break. The connective tissue will start to dissolve. Your bones get spongy and you can die of it. At some point, the British figured out if they gave limes to their sailors and they sucked on limes, that they didn't get scurvy. We know today it's because it's citrus with vitamin C in it. And that's why the British sailors became known as limeys. Because they were sucking on limes all the time. All right. So yes. So many sailors. Oh, and then some guys became sailors just because they were so desperately poor that this was a job they could do. But sometimes English ships didn't have enough sailors. They would just have something called press gangs, as guys who would sweep the streets of London and grab up guys and force them into the British Navy. This is also an issue for the Americans, even after the American Revolution, that the British call this impressment, that they just like sweep up Americans, they board American ships and grab guys and put them in the British Navy. And this is part of what we fought the War of 1812 over. So basically, when a British ship is taken by pirates, some of the sailors don't put up a fight and they're like, sweet, great, happy to join you, right? And the pirates would sometimes question the sailors like, how is your captain? And if the sailor said, he's a terrible captain, that was it for the captain. The pirates would take care of him. But if the sailors would say, you know what, he's a decent guy, he does the best they can, the pirates would spare the captain. So they tried to be fair and they listened to the sailors and took their lead. Was there a question? Yeah.
Yeah. So in this timeline, what's the overlap with whaling boats?
Oh, yeah. They're running around off of New England.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are the pirates wanting any of those people? They don't really have anything.
That is way too hard of work for pirates. No, they're not interested in the whale oil and stuff. And that's pretty far north. The pirates are more running the shipping lanes up and down the eastern seaboard of the Atlantic. They really like the Spanish treasure ships that are coming out of Central America and going back to Spain. That's the real prize that they want. No, whaling, that's too much hard work in cold weather. Like pirates aren't into that, right? No. Occasionally, if they're really, really interested in going on a longer trip, they'll go to Africa and they'll like try to take stuff from slave ships, which are often loaded not just with enslaved people, but with, goods and things from Africa and India. And Madagascar is also a very weak state. So a lot of pirates would hide out in Madagascar if, things were getting too hot for them. Madagascar is like a little pirate kingdom, right? There's a lot of pirates there. No one's bothering them, right? They're just hanging out there. All right, so if we go back to Mary Read, again, this is the woman whose mom dressed her as a boy from birth so she could pretend this was her legitimate son and get money from her husband's family for her. She goes to sea. She fights for the British in the military. Her ship is captured by pirates, and she actually happily becomes a pirate. And the pirates didn't think she's a man, and she ends up joining Calico Jack Rackham's crew. And then when Anne Bonny falls in love with her, she tells her she's actually not a boy, she's a girl. And so they have this sort of like, cross-dressing pirate romance going on. So, yeah. So, I mean, again, no rules, right? Like they're not following the conventional rules of society. And people, most of the witnesses say they were very brave, like they did the work of men. They fought like men. They wielded swords, they wielded muskets, and one of them was ran the powder during battles and things like that, making sure everyone was supplied with powder. So they joined Jack Rackham's crew. But so, like many pirates, they have a great time for a short time. But they are caught and they are tried. So this is one of the reasons that we know there's some truth to these stories, because there is a criminal record. So they're caught. while they're at a rum party. So be careful with your grog here, right? You're vulnerable to capture if you're not paying close attention. And there's a fight on board. And the story is that most of the men just didn't fight back, or they ran below deck. And it was Anne, Bonnie, and Mary Read who are the main ones who fight back. They're still captured, and they're mad about that. So we're not clear on if the men were cowards. This is a charge that the women levied at them, that we were the brave ones. We had courage. You guys were cowards. It could be that they were just super drunk too, right? This was a rum party. So again, we're not sure exactly what happened there, but they're mad about it. And witnesses came to the trial, people who had been attacked and robbed by the pirate crew. And the witnesses said things like, Anne and Mary wore men's jackets and long trousers. Each had a machete and pistol in their hands. So they're saying when they board ships and they rob them, that these women are dressed like men and they're fighting. They're armed and they're ready to go. And so Calico Jack Rackham is sentenced to execution, and they have them all there, and they watch him go up to the gallows. And he gives a long, sad look to Anne Bonny, and she doesn't say goodbye or sorry or I love you. She says she's sorry to see him there, but if he had fought like a man, he need not have been hanged like a dog. Last words he heard. Right. So she's pretty serious. So Anne and Mary are sentenced to execution, but they both claim they're pregnant. And they didn't have great ways of checking in those days. So they were not executed with the rest of the male pirates. They did have an out for being women. And at that point, we don't know what happens to them. We don't know if they were ultimately executed, if they died in prison, if they're ultimately freed, like the trail runs cold there. So you can decide what you want is their fate. You can write your own story at the end of it. Maybe they escaped. Maybe they bribed a prison guard. We don't know. So those are like the two most famous female pirates of the Caribbean in the Golden Age. And we wonder, I asked the question, why are there so few out of thousands of pirates that are running around the Caribbean during this Golden Age? Why are there only so few that are women? And so there's a few reasons. Mainly, sailors needed brute strength. It was a really physical, hard job. You're loading things on and off a ship, carrying stuff up and down a gangplank. Many sailors only lasted 5 to 7 years. They often got what they called busted bellies, which we today call what? Hernias, right? Like they're lifting so much and they don't have the weight belts and the fancy things we have now, that they're actually straining so much that they burst their abdominal muscles. Many get mutilated. There's a lot of things swinging around on ships, or you can get crushed by falling cargo. They could become lame. You can also, be in a shipwreck and die at sea. So there was a real need for brute strength. There's also what I have up here, bro network, that it was a very male-dominated space. These both the English Navy, the merchant ships, and the pirate ships. So many pirate captains banned women on their ships. Even if pirates wanted to bring their girlfriend or their wife on ship, most of them banned them. They thought it was bad luck. Like sailors were famously very superstitious because you never know what's going to happen with the weather. And they often put a lot of stock in superstition to hope for good weather and good seas. And if a woman was on board and there was a storm or a squall, they would blame the woman. Like this was her fault. Also, people like Blackbeard famously banned women on his ships. He banned boys too, because the men would fight over them. Yeah, because so he thought it undermined the esprit de corps, right? It undermined the network and the community that the men were making that made them an effective fighting force, an effective working force together. So they thought the women were divisive on ship. And there was also some ideas swirling around that sexual repression was good for you. It made you stronger and smarter. It's kind of like that old Seinfeld episode, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. Or has anyone ever heard a coach tell players, football players or wrestlers or boxers, don't get with a girl the night before the big game? Yep. It'll weaken your legs. I mean, yeah. So we still have some of those ideas swirling around today. So some of these pirate captains thought, like, have fun on shore, like have at it in a port city with the barmaids and the whatnot, but not on ship, right? We need you in top shape with focus and everything on the ship. And we also know that there's very few female pirates because, again, pirates are kind of tricky to study. They're not great like letter writers, diary keepers. They're not writing their memoirs a lot, right? Like they're not a literary type of people. The main things we know about pirates are when they're arrested. And then we have trial transcripts and things like that. And what we know from arrest records is very few female pirates are arrested, which leads us to believe there are very few female pirates. However, the two that I just talked about fit into this larger celebration of basically cool women of the 18th century that we call warrior women. And in those days, they don't have Netflix, they don't have Hulu, they don't have YouTube. What they have are bars and taverns. And so there's, especially for working class people, hanging out in a bar, singing songs was a huge source of community entertainment, right? Like you leave your house, you hang out in a bar, you sing ballads. Even today, has anyone ever watched like a British soccer match? What are the fans doing the whole time?
They're cheering, chanting.
They're
Little,
they're singing and chanting the whole time, like far more than American audiences do. So that's a leftover, like that's a continuation, I guess I should say, a continuity of working class culture, a very song oriented, ballad oriented culture that's still around from like dudes drinking at a soccer game, right? And they're singing about, and they make up songs on the spot. So there's this huge like ballad culture, and there's a real celebration, some really popular ballads about warrior women of the 18th century. One is a woman named Christian Davies who fought as a man and fought battles with the English in Europe, was captured by the French and somehow got ransomed out. And she was honored by Queen Anne. So she was recognized for her military service. So people wrote ballads about her and sang about her. There's a woman named Anne Mills, who's pictured here, who served as a sailor in the War of Austrian Succession, another war in Europe about who's going to sit on the throne. And at one point, she cut off the head of a man in hand-to-hand combat. So that's what this image from the 18th century is, her holding this man's head. Yeah. So, and you can see, yeah, she's pretty tough. There's a woman named Hannah Snell that people sang about she got pregnant, or she was married. She became pregnant. Her husband, panicked and abandoned her and went to sea, and she chased him to sea, tracked him down. So people like had this like, you go girl, kind of songs about her, like right on. It was kind of like single ladies, you put a ring on it, come back. So these warrior women ballads were popular at taverns. People sang them on docks. People sang them in urban areas and at fair and at hangings. In those days, executions were public, and they were another form of entertainment. So Wapping Dock was a place where they hanged pirates and other people, and people would come in droves to watch, the spectacle. They bring kids, they bring a picnic lunch, right? And they'd sing songs. It was a whole festival atmosphere. And the idea is you bring your kids to teach them, like, don't end up like those guys, right? Listen to your mom. Don't lie, don't steal, don't become a pirate, or you can actually see them being hanged there. But they also had this kind of festival atmosphere, and people sang songs at them. So this celebrated the toughness of working class women. It celebrated the ability of women to cross these boundaries and make their own rules. So this isn't like how the middle or upper class behaved, but this was a working class kind of rebellion against stifling social norms. So this is super popular throughout the 18th century, but by the 19th century, these warrior women ballads disappear. So they're replaced more by this repressive Victorian culture that's much more about being ladylike, being proper, and following the rules. So people are no longer celebrating, yeah, this woman cut the head of a guy, she's cool, But while this 18th century warrior women ballad culture is going on, this book, The General History of the Pirates, is written. It's published in 1724. And this is one of our biggest primary sources about pirates, that someone took a lot of research and looked at trials and interviewed people who had been captured by pirates and lived to tell about it. So they would describe what they looked like. They would describe what Blackbeard looked like, how he acted, how he talked to their captain. And you can see this is a huge book. It's hundreds of pages. But on the cover, he highlights Mary Read and Anne Bonny. So even though that's just two of the pirates in the book, they knew that this would sell, right? That this fit into this kind of warrior women ethos of celebration of women doing cool things and, being different. So this is, and you can see how many chapters there are, right? If you can see, the chapters on there. So they're only a small part of the book, but they're on the cover to kind of draw people in and sell. Okay, I think I have time to talk a bit about just a bit about the enduring popularity of pirates and why pirates loom so large in the imagination. I've already mentioned that in part they're working class heroes. They have this kind of Robin Hood ethos of challenging the rich and transferring wealth from the rich to the poor. They're a challenge to those kind of ethics. They're also a democracy in an age of monarchy. So pirate ships in the early 18th century, this is before the American Revolution, operated democratically, that a pirate crew did have articles. They would draw them up. The one or two literate guys on board would write them down. And the crew voted on things. They elected their captain. They elected a quartermaster. And the quartermaster dealt with the treasure and made sure it was divided up equally. The captain didn't have access to the treasure. Only the quartermaster did. And so they took care of their sick and their injured. So basically they had universal health care on pirate ships, such as it was. Like, it wasn't, great. It was, barbers putting leeches on you, but still, like, it was for everyone. And so this, one of my favorite books about pirates, The Republic of Pirates, that you can see up here by Colin Woodard, he makes this argument that this is not the main cause or the only cause of the American Revolution, but he thinks that the pirates were popular amongst the working classes, and people in American taverns are singing ballads about pirates, and they like that they operate democratically. Like, they think that sounds more fair than the awful authoritarian world of monarchy that they live in. And he thinks this helps pave the way for the American Revolution, that this helps popularize this alternate political system, to the point where Blackbeard, once he's really rampaging up and down the eastern seaboard, he's bribed the governor of North Carolina, and he's hanging out there in Bath with Governor Eden, and so he's got a cozy spot in North Carolina. But the governor of Virginia really didn't like Blackbeard, and he kept trying to go after him. But most of his captains couldn't find men who would man a ship to go after Blackbeard. The sailors liked him. They thought he was cool, like they admired him. His ability to mutiny against bad treatment and get rich and live a life of adventure. So this is part of the popularity of pirates, that they rejected a life of poverty and grinding authority and tyranny, and chosen a life of adventure and fantasy. And if you can see on the right that we've got the famous skull and crossbones, right? But what's underneath it? Does anyone know what that image is? That's right, an hourglass. So pirates didn't have one universal flag, but they often had variations like this, of a skull and crossbones, or an hourglass, or a skeleton holding an hourglass. What do you think the hourglass is about? That's right. They're basically saying, we would rather have a short life. Like, they knew the score. They knew if you're a pirate, you'll probably be captured and executed within a few years. They've made their peace with that. They're basically saying, with the skull and crossbones and the hourglass, we are willing to do that. We'd rather die young and live a good life under our own rules than live under someone else's rules. So this is part of the enduring popularity of pirates, that a lot of people throughout the ages latch on to this and enjoy it. So I'm just going to kind of zip through some things really quickly. There's a lot of different novels and things celebrating pirates as sort of fun and adventurous. Oh, there we go. I'm going to kind of zip through this. There's dime novels in the 18th century. If anyone remembers Tom Sawyer, at one point, Tom Sawyer and his friends run away. They feel like no one's treating them fairly. They don't like the rules, and they play pirate. And clearly, Mark Twain had read this book, The Black Avenger of the Spanish Main, because the names that Tom Sawyer comes up with, like the Red Hand, are straight from this book. So it's clear it's popular amongst young boys. Interestingly, when Treasure Island comes out in 1883, this is one of the books where the pirates aren't romantic heroes. They're straight up villains. They're criminals. They're lazy. They're murderous. And the hero is this rule-abiding cabin boy who takes them down. And part of what's going on here is this is the height of the British Empire. And so people are more invested in the British Navy, in order and authority, and helping the British get people money and wealth for them. And so pirates are undermining them. And it's in Treasure Island that we see some of these stereotypes that we have not seen before, like the eye patches. And I see some of our people have been wearing them for tonight. The peg legs, parrots, treasure maps, that all comes from this novel. It is not in this book, The History of Pirates, which is a firsthand account of what pirates are actually doing during the Golden Age of Piracy. This comes from the imagination of this author, but it grabs the imagination and people are really fascinated with it. And even today, when people dress like a pirate, they're dressing like what's described in Treasure Island. Yep. All right. So pirates are the good guys at the height of the British Empire. And in America, it's the Gilded Age. And many people admire the robber barons, like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. Like people, even if they're poor, they admire the rich. They want to be like them. And so the criminals and the pirates are the bad guys. But by the 1930s, you get the Great Depression. And movies in the 1930s and 40s, the bankers are the bad guys, and the mean captains, your awful bosses are the bad guys. So has anyone ever seen It's a Wonderful Life?
Yeah.
Who's the bad guy in that movie? Mr. Potter, right? The richest man in town, right? So the way people think about wealth and poverty and government and authority is related to their fantasies and adventures. So in the 1930s and 40s, when the rich are the bad guys, they let America down, they let the stock market crash, they overinvested and overspeculated. Then you get the rise of tons of pirate and Robin Hood movies in the 30s and 40s, where pirates are, again, the romantic heroes, the Robin Hoods, the stealing from the rich and distributing wealth to the poor. Yep, they're revived. Then we get Disney gets involved. There we go. Makes this Pirate of the Caribbean ride, which is I think it's part of like drawing on this cinematic history of like, good-looking guys like Errol Flynn being romantic heroes that everyone admires. So, Disney like capitalized on that fantasy, adventure, exoticism. It becomes the most popular ride at the Disney theme park. They expanded to Florida. It's still around today. They've cleaned it up a little. Apparently, when it was first made, they had this winch auction. Like fun adventure, right? By 2017, they thought, maybe selling women isn't so fun for kids at a theme park. So they made it a general auction. So then we get the 500-pound gorilla of pirate movies in the modern era, which is the Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a lot of reasons this movie is popular. First of all, it's beautifully shot. They nailed the cast, just young up-and-coming actors like Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom, a great villain with Jeffrey Rush. But also the context is there's a recession in 2001. So again, in tough economic times, people turn to the Robin Hood and the pirates, right, as their fantasy and adventure. And this follows like a classic Italian kind of story where you've got a buffoon in the middle, you've got a love story, and you have a villain. So I also think this character of Captain Jack Sparrow, who's one of the most enduring cinematic, characters, is interesting because he's on the borderline of a lot of extremes. He's not a full villain. He's not fully a hero. He's sometimes both, right? Sometimes he's villainous. Sometimes he's heroic. He's kind of between male and female, right? He's got eyeliner. He's got long hair. He's got beads. He actually acts kind of swishy at times, right? Like he kind of walks around like that. So he's not one or the other. And you don't even know if he's drunk or sober at any given point, right? And that's a running joke in the movie. So I think he's someone that people can project a lot of things on. Like whatever is going on with you, you could project, like I could move my needle one way or the other along many of these axes. And then, of course, one of my favorite characters in the movie is Elizabeth Swann, who really embodies a lot of the pirate fantasy of escaping the rules, particularly for women. Like one of our early scenes with her, she's being married to a guy she doesn't love. She literally can't breathe because she's constricted by her clothes. Yeah, it's a metaphor being constricted by the expectations of being a lady and all the pressures of being a woman. Once she turns pirate, you can see how she's totally different. She can breathe. Her clothes fit her. She is happy. She can marry the man she loves. So this is part of the fantasy of being a pirate. And you know who likes escaping rules, not having to follow authority, and doing what they want is kids. So there's this whole current, what I found a little bit odd trend of lots. How many people have seen a pirate book for kids?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Kind of wild since they actually are robbers and rapists and stuff like that. But it's marketed to kids as kids love this idea of escaping authority. You don't have a bedtime. You don't have to brush your teeth. You can eat what you want, right? Like, so this pirate fantasy endures on. So overall, there are real pirates from the Golden Age of the Caribbean. There were real women who escaped the regulations of their time and lived a short but fun life, doing what they wanted in the Caribbean, and it endures today for all of these reasons. All right, Thank you. I'm happy to take questions now. Yeah, and so I'll take questions and I'll repeat your questions. So if anyone is listening at home or later on, we can hear them all. So any questions? Yes.
Did you see the delightful 2 seasons of Our Flag Means Death?
No, but a lot of people have been telling me I should watch it. The question is, Our Flag Means Death?
Yeah.
Right. No, I have not seen that, but I'm looking forward to it.
It's very fun.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Do you know how the pirates treated the slaves when they took on slave ships?
That's a great question. Is some of them sold them for profit, but some of them invited them to join them. So a majority of Blackbeard's crew were Africans. So yeah, there's actually which doesn't make it into the movies in the 30s and 40s, right? Like so that is a whole hidden history of piracy that would be awesome to explore. They were yes. Is that a hand?
Yeah. You started out with the quote of Alexander the Great.
Sure.
And the pirate.
Yep.
But he was a good deal of time before trial records were maintained, which you got a quote.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll bet you there is one. What that trial record doesn't say about state-sponsored piratism is after he chastised him, he also offered him a job.
So we have a comment that Alexander the Great offered this pirate a job. Right. It's a beat them or join them situation. Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Wasn't there a pirate that had some island off New Orleans that was like a socialist kind of where they shared the wealth?
Oh, the question is a pirate off of New Orleans who shared the wealth. I don't know that off the top of my head. Does not sound. It sounds perfectly plausible to me.
John Lafitte.
Oh, Lafitte, yeah. Yeah, pirates loved islands where there was a weak state and no one patrolling them, and they tended to have that Robin Hood ethos of sharing the wealth with their fellow pirates. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Just before you guys go, first off, thank you, Michelle. I think I'm jealous of all of your students now. That was so fun. If you guys enjoyed this program and want to see more like it, please consider supporting the museum. That can come in the form of donations or membership, or coming to any of our other programs. We do have a couple of exciting programs coming up. In 2 weeks, we are going to be having Spooky Science Night here at the museum. So we'll be open from 5 to 8, so you get to explore the museum at night. We're going to have a variety of science experiments going on. And then I also think it's going to be pretty exciting because we're actually going to rig the submarine for red. So it's going to be lit like it was at night. So it's going to be all red light. So that should be really cool. And then next month for our speaker series, or for the Think and Drink, we are going to be talking about lady lighthouse keepers, and very specifically Georgia Stebbins, who was the longest lasting lighthouse keeper for the North Point Lighthouse in Milwaukee. So that will be super cool. And then just like, much farther away, we have our Christmas tree ship day that's going to be coming up on the first Saturday in December. It's a free day for the museum, so you can also come and meet Santa if you guys would like. So lots of fun things coming out. There are some calendars and things like that. If you'd like to fill out a survey, that would be fantastic. And there are also some folks in the back who are fundraising to stop child hunger in Africa. So if you want to check them out as well, that would be great. Thank you so much for coming out. Yes, no, that's very fair.